The safe opened its eyes 600 feet beneath the Mediterranean. Emma Brooks hovered above the wreck of the Asteria, while her dive lights cut through 18 years of darkness. The superyacht lay broken across a limestone shelf off the Amalfi Coast, its once white hull buried beneath coral, silt, and the slow weight of the sea. Her breathing filled the helmet. In, out, measured, controlled. The wreck creaked around her like something remembering how it had died. Emma moved through what had once been the owner's private study. The ceiling had collapsed sideways, and a chandelier rested against the wall, as if gravity had changed its mind. Silver fish passed through shattered windows. Black water filled the bookshelves. Her gloved hand brushed a brass plate beneath a fallen desk. There, the salvage coordinates had been accurate. She signaled the surface team and pushed aside a slab of rotting wood. A rectangular steel safe had been welded directly into the yacht's frame. It was smaller than she expected, perhaps 20 inches wide, with no mechanical dial and no visible keyhole, only a black glass panel. Emma cleared away the marine growth. The panel lit beneath her hand. A thin red line traveled across her glove. Her helmet display flickered. Then the safe projected words into the water. Glove obstruction. Direct contact required. Emma stared. The electronics should have been dead after 18 years beneath salt water. Surface. I have an active biometric panel, she said through the comm system. Static answered. Then the voice of her dive partner, Lucas Hale. Say again? The safe still has power. That is impossible. Tell the safe. Emma examined the surrounding steel. No wires, no external battery. The casing had been pressure sealed and probably powered by a long-life chemical cell. Her contract required retrieval, not opening. She should have attached the lift line and left it alone. Instead, a name appeared beneath the warning. Authorized operator, Emma Joy Brooks. Emma stopped breathing. Her full name glowed against the black glass. No one in Italy knew her middle name. She had not used it professionally in years. Lucas, she said. Who hired us? The line filled with static. Emma, attach the lift bag and come up. Who hired us? I'll explain on deck. The safe emitted a low pulse. Identity confirmation required. Emma looked toward the dark corridor behind her. Something moved beyond the doorway. Not a fish, a diver. The figure wore black equipment without identification lights. Emma reached for the cutting tool on her belt. The stranger disappeared behind the broken wall. Lucas, we are not alone. No answer. Emma released the outer glove from her right hand. Cold seawater struck her skin. She pressed her bare thumb against the panel. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then the safe unlocked with a deep, metallic vibration that traveled through the wreck. Identity confirmed. Welcome back, Emma. The study lights came on. Not the yacht's original lighting. Small emergency lamps hidden inside the walls burned pale blue, revealing a passage behind the safe, and 3 black-clad divers moving toward her. Emma grabbed the retrieval line. The first diver accelerated. She released compressed air into the lift bag. The safe tore free from the frame. The expanding bag surged upward, dragging Emma through the broken ceiling as the divers reached for her fins. One caught her ankle. Emma twisted and drove the metal edge of her cutting tool across his wrist control. His propulsion unit failed. He spun sideways into the wreckage. The second diver seized the lift line. Emma cut the auxiliary cord. The bag shot through the opening, taking the safe with it. She followed. The third diver came from below. Emma kicked hard, struck his mask with her heel, and climbed through the dark water while her oxygen alarm began to pulse. The ascent line had moved. Her surface vessel was drifting. Sea Finch, respond. Silence. Emma looked up. Far above, lights moved across the surface. Too many lights. The ocean above her had become crowded with ships. _ Emma broke through the waves beneath a sky turning black with storm. Rain struck her mask. The Sea Finch pitched 30 yards away. Its crane extended over the water. The steel safe hung above the stern, dripping seawater. Beyond it, dark yachts surrounded the salvage vessel in a perfect circle. There were 7 of them, long, low, and nearly identical, with black hulls and no visible names. Their navigation lights burned through the rain like red eyes. Lucas leaned over the Sea Finch's rail. "Emma, move!" She swam toward the ladder. A small black tender cut across her path. 4 men stood aboard it. The man at the bow wore no raincoat. He was dressed in a black suit despite the weather, tall enough to make the men around him appear smaller. His dark hair was swept back from a hard, controlled face. Rain moved across his olive skin. A faint scar cut through one eyebrow. Emma had seen his photograph before. Vincenzo Altieri, southern Italy's most feared shipping magnate, if newspapers were being polite. The head of the Altieri organization, if they were not. His family controlled private ports from Naples to Palermo, security contracts across the Tyrrhenian Sea, and enough legitimate maritime business to disguise an empire built in the spaces between law and violence. The tender stopped beside Emma. Vincenzo looked down at her, not at the safe, at her face. Something shifted in his expression. Recognition appeared, then vanished so quickly she almost doubted it. "Get her out of the water," he said. Emma backed away. "I have my own boat." "Your boat has been compromised." "That sounds like a threat." "It is a fact." One of his men reached toward her. Emma pulled the emergency flare from her vest and aimed it at the tender's fuel compartment. "Touch me, and we all become brighter." The men froze. Vincenzo's gaze lowered to the flare, then returned to her eyes. "You found the safe. It found me." Lightning opened the sky behind him. For the first time, his control showed a fracture. "What did it say?" "You tell me." "Emma." The sound of her name in his voice made her colder than the water. She had not introduced herself. "You know who I am." "Yes." "How?" Vincenzo looked toward the Sea Finch. Lucas stood near the safe, speaking urgently to someone on a satellite phone. "Because someone arranged this dive around your identity. Was it you?" "No." "Then who?" A gunshot cracked across the water. The flare disappeared from Emma's hand as a bullet struck the metal housing beside it. Vincenzo moved instantly. He reached down, caught the back of her harness, and pulled her over the tender's side with one arm. Emma hit the deck against his chest. His body covered hers as another shot struck the water where she had been. The shooter was not on the surrounding yachts. He was aboard the Sea Finch. Lucas held the weapon. Emma stared at him through the rain. Her dive partner of 6 years looked directly at her. Then he turned the crane. The safe swung over the sea. "Lucas!" she shouted. He released the cable. The safe dropped onto the Sea Finch's deck instead of into the water. 2 crewmen rushed to secure it. Vincenzo pulled Emma behind the tender's reinforced console. "Your friend sold the coordinates. You don't know that. He just fired at you. He may have been aiming at someone behind me." Vincenzo stared at her. "You defend people beyond reason. You accuse them without evidence. Evidence is usually the part that arrives after survival." The Sea Finch's engine roared. Lucas tried to break through the circle of yachts. The black vessels closed formation. Vincenzo spoke into his radio. "Disable the engine. Do not damage the safe." Emma grabbed his wrist. "My crew is on that boat." His eyes dropped to her hand. A black and gray tattoo covered the back of his. "Then tell them to surrender. I am not giving them orders for you. Do you believe I need your permission? I believe you dragged me out of the ocean and still have not explained why a safe from a wreck older than my career knows my fingerprint." For a second, the storm seemed quieter around them. Vincenzo stepped closer. He was broad-shouldered, powerfully built, and so still that the violence around him felt like something he had chosen not to use yet. "The safe was designed by Claire Brooks," he said. Emma's grip loosened. Her mother's name entered the air like a wound reopening. Claire Brooks had disappeared 18 years earlier while working on maritime security systems in Europe. The official report claimed she died aboard a ferry near Capri. No body had been recovered. "What did you say?" Vincenzo's gaze did not leave hers. "Your mother built it." The Sea Finch's engine exploded behind them. Emma turned toward the flash. The blast was controlled, low in the engine compartment. Smoke rose, but the vessel remained afloat. Vincenzo's fleet moved in. "I will take you to my flagship," he said. "No." The storm reaches us in less than an hour. My crew will be transferred safely. And Lucas? His expression turned cold. If he surrenders. Emma stood, despite the tender's violent movement. You do not get to hold me, because my mother built something you want. I am not holding you because of what I want. Then why? Vincenzo looked at the safe on the Sea Finch. Because the moment it recognized you, every ship in this water became willing to kill you. _ I can call a ride share, Grace said. Roman's expression did not change. You can. Its black hull cut through the storm without displaying a name. 3 decks of dark glass rose above a reinforced lower structure. The interior combined polished walnut, pale stone, and hidden steel doors that sealed soundlessly behind Emma as she was escorted aboard. Her crew had been moved to another Altieri vessel. Lucas was missing. The safe sat inside a secure laboratory on the flagship's lower deck. Emma had been given dry clothes, black trousers, a cream sweater, and a dark wool coat. They fit too well to have been found by accident. She stood across the laboratory from Vincenzo. He had changed into a charcoal shirt and black trousers. Without the jacket, he appeared even more physically imposing. Tattoos climbed one side of his neck and disappeared beneath his collar. Additional black and gray ink covered the backs of his hands. Between them, the safe waited beneath white lights. Open it, he said. No. You already opened the outer lock. I unlocked the panel. The internal compartment never opened. Then finish. Emma folded her arms. Return my crew to port. The harbor is closed because of the storm. Release them onto another rescue vessel. No vessel leaves this formation. So, I am a prisoner. You are protected. Against my will. Vincenzo's jaw tightened. There are men aboard my fleet who have served my family for 20 years. I do not know which of them belongs to Bellomo. Cesar Bellomo. The name was known throughout maritime salvage circles. Bellomo Holdings purchased damaged ships, bankrupt ports, and disputed wreck rights. The company's polite reputation had survived more suspicious accidents than seemed mathematically possible. He hired the Sea Finch, Emma said, through 3 shell companies. And Lucas worked for him. Yes. The betrayal landed slowly. Lucas had been beside her during decompression sickness in Belize, an engine fire off Florida, and the recovery of 2 fishermen in a collapsed trawler near Sardinia. He knew the date her mother disappeared. He knew Emma had spent half her life taking jobs in the Mediterranean because some part of her still believed the sea might return an answer. He knew the safe would recognize me, she said. He suspected. How? Your mother left records indicating the biometric key belonged to her daughter. Then why didn't Bellomo take me before the dive? The safe required a live match at depth. Removing it without authorization would have destroyed the contents. Emma stared at the black panel. What is inside? Vincenzo did not answer. She laughed without humor. You are asking me to trust you while refusing every useful truth. I am asking you to survive long enough to hate me later. That may be the most honest thing you have said. Lightning flashed through the dark glass wall. The flagship rolled slightly beneath them. Emma placed her thumb against the panel. Vincenzo moved closer. The safe lit. Identity confirmed. Emma Joy Brooks. A second message appeared. Primary custodian status verified. Then, Altieri command signature required. Emma looked at Vincenzo. You are part of the lock. Apparently, you said my mother built this. She worked for my father. That was not the full answer. Emma could hear it in the space he left afterward. Vincenzo pressed his palm to the second scanner. The machine read his pulse, print, and subdermal identity mark. The outer lid released. Inside was not money. A glass cylinder rested within a shock-proof cradle. At its center floated a black crystalline processor no larger than a deck of cards. Thin blue light moved through it like water under moonlight. A small display activated. Pelagos Maritime Command Corps, dual custody active. Emma leaned closer. What does it command? Every vessel using Altieri navigation architecture. She looked through the glass wall at the surrounding yachts. All of them? More than these. How many? 43 active ships, 9 ports, 6 offshore storage facilities. And Bellomo wants control. Yes. Do you? Vincenzo's eyes met hers. Yes. The blunt answer chilled her. You could have lied. You would have known. I barely know you. You have been looking at me as though every silence is evidence. It usually is. The safe opened a second compartment. A small waterproof drive rose from within. The label read, "For Emma." Her hands began to tremble. Vincenzo reached toward her, then stopped before touching. "Play it," Emma said. He inserted the drive into the secure console. The screen flickered. A woman appeared. Claire Brooks sat inside what looked like the Asteria's engineering room. Her dark blonde hair was tied back. She looked exhausted, frightened, and alive in a way photographs had never preserved. Emma stopped breathing. "Emma," Claire said into the camera, "if you are seeing this, then the wrong people found the wreck, or the right person finally became brave enough to return." Emma covered her mouth. Vincenzo stood completely still beside her. Claire continued. The Pelagos core was designed to coordinate vessel safety systems across the Altieri fleet. It can lock engines, redirect navigation, seal compartments, and trigger emergency scuttling protocols. I built a safeguard after I discovered Cesare Bellomo was using these ships to move people who were never supposed to arrive anywhere. Images appeared beside her. Passenger manifests without names. Cargo holds converted into hidden cells, payments to officials, coordinates in deep water. Vincenzo's father tried to stop him, Claire said. Bellomo arranged the sinking of the Asteria before the evidence could reach authorities. Emma turned slowly toward Vincenzo. His face had become stone. The recording continued. I enrolled your fingerprint because no family on this coast could be trusted with the final decision. You were 14. You complained that the scanner was too cold. A memory surfaced. Her mother laughing in a sunlit workshop. Emma pressing her hand onto black glass while salt dried on her wrist. She had believed it was a game. Claire's expression softened. I am sorry I made you part of this. The laboratory door alarm sounded. One of Vincenzo's men entered. Sir, we have lost contact with Vessel 4. Vincenzo looked toward the fleet display. A black yacht vanished from the network. Then another. The laboratory lights dimmed. Emma heard the safe lock itself. The deck tilted beneath them. An explosion struck the stern. The glass wall turned white with sea spray. Vincenzo caught Emma before she hit the floor. Emergency alarms filled the ship. A voice came through the speakers. Lucas Hale. Emma, bring the core to the aft dive bay. Bellomo has your crew. If Altieri follows you, I vent the lower decks. Emma looked at Vincenzo. His arm remained around her waist. He released her slowly. You trusted the wrong man, he said. So did you. He boarded your flagship. His eyes hardened. A second explosion shook the vessel. Water alarms activated below. Vincenzo looked at the Pelagos core, then at Emma. Lucas does not know the core requires both of us. He knows now. He heard the safe. Then he will keep us alive until Bellomo arrives. Or kill everyone else to make us cooperate. Vincenzo opened a hidden cabinet and removed 2 compact diving systems. The lower escape route connects to a sea cave beneath the cliffs. You have an underwater exit on your flagship? I dislike ships with only one way off. Emma took the equipment. My crew is in the aft section. We cannot reach them from inside. The corridor is already flooding. I am not leaving them. Bellomo needs them alive as leverage. That is not a guarantee. No. Vincenzo stepped close enough that his voice no longer needed volume. It is the best calculation available. I am not one of your calculations. Something moved behind his eyes. No, he said. That is becoming the problem. The ship rolled again. Metal screamed beneath the deck. Vincenzo sealed the Pelagos core inside its pressure case and strapped it across Emma's back. She stared at him. You are giving it to me? It opens for you, and if I swim away, I will follow. That sounds like a threat. It was not meant as one. What was it meant as? His gaze lowered briefly to her mouth. A fact I no longer know how to change. Underscore. The aft dive bay was half underwater when they reached it. Emergency lights flashed through spray. The outer hatch led directly into a storm-black sea, crashing against the cliffs below Ravello. Vincenzo secured Emma's regulator. She checked his air connection and found his hands steady. "Have you done this before?" she asked. "Combat dives. Cave dives? No." "Then listen to me." His eyes narrowed at the command. Emma tightened the buckle across his shoulder. "In open water, power means nothing. You follow the line, watch your air, and do not improvise because you dislike being told what to do." "I rarely dislike good instructions." "You dislike all instructions, from most people." The ship groaned. Water burst through the inner door. Emma fitted her mask. Vincenzo caught her wrist. "Not hard. Do not leave my sight. Then keep up." They entered the sea together. The storm above became a violent ceiling of white foam. Below, the water darkened into blue-black space. Emma activated her light. A guide cable ran from the hull toward a narrow opening in the cliff. The cave entrance disappeared beneath crashing waves. She led. Vincenzo stayed close behind, one hand on the pressure case attached to her back whenever the surge threatened to turn her. The tunnel narrowed after 50 feet. Rock walls pressed around them. Their bubbles struck the ceiling and broke into silver fragments. Emma checked his gauge. "Enough air," they continued. A distant explosion traveled through the water. The flagship's lights went out behind them. The surge pulled the guideline sideways. Emma moved around a stone column. Her oxygen hose snagged. The regulator tore from her mouth. Water filled her throat. She reached backward, but the line had twisted around a rusted anchor chain embedded in the rock. Vincenzo turned. He saw the empty regulator. His composure disappeared. He crossed the distance in one violent movement and seized her harness. Emma pointed toward the trapped line. Instead of untangling it carefully, he pulled his knife and cut through the hose. The remaining air escaped in a roaring stream of bubbles. Emma's eyes widened. Vincenzo removed his own regulator and forced it into her mouth. She breathed. One desperate breath, then another. He had no air. Emma tried to return the regulator. He pushed it back toward her. His face had changed. The feared mafia boss looked terrified, not of the cave, of watching her drown. Emma caught the front of his harness, took one breath, and gave him the regulator. They shared it. One breath for her, one for him. The process should have been clinical. Instead, every exchange felt intimate, their faces inches apart, his hand holding the side of her mask, her fingers pressed against the powerful line of his shoulder while darkness closed around them. Emma found the hose connection and attached her emergency cylinder. She restored her regulator. Vincenzo exhaled hard. She pointed to the trapped line. He cut the chain instead of the hose this time. They moved forward. The cave ceiling rose. Moonlight appeared through water above them. Emma surfaced inside a hidden grotto. She tore off her mask and pulled in air. Vincenzo emerged beside her. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he seized both sides of her face. "Are you hurt?" His hands were shaking. Emma stared at him. "I am fine. The line. I know. You stopped breathing. For 6 seconds. It was longer. It felt longer." His thumbs moved across her cheeks, as though confirming she was real. Then he realized what he was doing. He released her and stepped back. The absence of his hands felt abrupt. Emma climbed onto the rock shelf. The grotto opened into a cavern containing an old stone dock and a ruined chapel carved into the cliff. Rain entered through a crack high above. Somewhere beyond the rock, waves thundered against the Amalfi Coast. Vincenzo removed the pressure case from her back. The Pelagos core remained intact. "You cut my primary airline," Emma said. "It was trapped. You cut the part supplying oxygen. I corrected the mistake." "You nearly drowned correcting it." His expression remained cold, but she had seen the truth underwater. "You panicked." "No, you absolutely panicked," I responded quickly. "You tried to give me all your air." Vincenzo looked toward the black water. Emma stepped closer. "Why?" His jaw tightened. "You are necessary to open the core." "That is not why." "No." The admission entered the cave quietly. Vincenzo sat on the edge of the stone dock and checked the cut along his forearm. It was shallow, probably caused by the chain. Emma opened the emergency kit. Give me your arm. It is nothing. You can command a fleet after I stop the bleeding. He extended his arm. She cleaned the cut. Without his jacket and soaked shirt, the full strength of his body was impossible to ignore. Black and gray tattoos curved along his forearms and disappeared beneath the short sleeves of his dive layer. The designs were intricate: waves, saints, broken anchors, and lines of Latin text. Emma wrapped the injury. What does the anchor mean? Vincenzo looked at the tattoo. Something that holds even when the vessel should be allowed to drift. That sounds unhealthy. It probably is. She tied the bandage. Lightning flashed through the roof crack. You recognized me when you saw me in the water, she said. He did not answer. You knew my face. I knew the scar on your wrist. Emma looked down. A pale line crossed the inside of her left wrist, the result of an accident she barely remembered from the year her mother disappeared. Where did you see it? Vincenzo rose. The cave seemed smaller when he stood. On the Asteria. The words emptied the air. You were there. Yes. How old were you? 22. What happened? Bellomo's men boarded during the storm. Your mother had discovered the hidden passengers and copied the fleet records. She moved you into an engineering compartment while my father tried to reach the bridge. Emma's heart beat painfully. I remember smoke. There was a fire near the generators. A man carried me through water. Vincenzo's face showed no emotion, but she knew. You. Yes. She stepped back. You rescued me. I removed you from the lower passage. That sounds less heroic. It was not heroism. What happened to my mother? Vincenzo looked toward the chapel. She stayed behind to seal the Pelagos core. That is not the whole truth. No. Emma waited. Rain fell through the cavern roof between them. Bellomo's men were cutting through the engine room door, Vincenzo said. Claire knew that if they entered, they would reach you before I could get you to the evacuation capsule. What did she do? She ordered me to close the watertight bulkhead. Emma felt cold all over. Was she behind it? Yes. You sealed her inside? Yes. The single word struck harder than denial. Did you know the compartment was flooding? Yes. Emma slapped him. The sound echoed through the cave. Vincenzo did not move. You left my mother to drown. I carried you to the upper deck. That was not what I said. She made me choose. And you chose me. Yes. Anger and grief collided inside Emma until she could not separate them. You never told me. Bellomo believed every survivor died. My father arranged a false ferry report and returned you to American authorities under another rescue manifest. You let me believe she disappeared in an accident. I was told it was the only way to keep you alive. You were very obedient when other people were deciding my life. His expression tightened. I spent 18 years trying to destroy Bellomo's routes. That did not give me my mother back. No. Did you ever go back for her? The compartment collapsed before I could return, before you could, or before you chose to. Vincenzo took the question without looking away. Before I was strong enough to disobey everyone around me. Emma turned from him. The safe rested on the stone dock. The object had returned her mother and taken her away again in the same hour. A light activated on the Pelagos display. The recording resumed automatically. Claire's face appeared. If Vincenzo is alive, she said, he will blame himself for closing the bulkhead. Emma froze. Vincenzo did too. Claire looked directly into the camera. I ordered him to do it. Bellomo's men were less than 30 seconds away. Emma, you were unconscious in the evacuation passage. If that door stayed open, they would take you and the core. Emma closed her eyes. I am not asking you to forgive him, Claire continued. I am telling you the choice was mine. The recording flickered. The Pelagos core has two final commands. Dominion transfers permanent control of every connected vessel. Mercy destroys the network by opening the scuttling systems and erasing the navigation architecture. One command creates an empire. The other ends it. Claire's face softened. Choose people over power, even when power promises it can protect them. The message ended. Silence filled the grotto. Emma looked at Vincenzo. Which command did you plan to use? He answered without hesitation. Dominion. Even after knowing what Bellomo did? I believed I could use the fleet differently. You believed control would become moral in your hands. Yes, at least you are honest. I have lied enough tonight. The storm shook the cavern. Emma looked toward the tunnel entrance. My crew is still out there. Vincenzo's gaze hardened. Bellomo will take them to Punta Lupo. What is there? A naval fortress converted into a private harbor. The fleet council meets there during storms because satellites cannot see through the cliffs. Then that is where Lucas is taking the core. He does not have the core. He thinks we do. He will tell Bellomo we escaped with it, and Bellomo will use my crew to bring us in. Yes. Emma lifted the pressure case. Vincenzo reached for it. She pulled it back. No, you cannot carry it through the upper passage alone. I am not giving you control. I am not asking for control. You held me captive on your flagship, to keep Bellomo from taking you. You made the decision without me. Vincenzo's expression darkened. I did not know another way. Learn one. For several seconds, the only sound was the storm. Then he lowered his hand. What do you choose? To rescue my crew. That is not what I meant. I am not choosing dominion or mercy until I know exactly what each one will do. Bellomo will not give us time. Then help me create it. Something close to admiration moved through Vincenzo's eyes. It was not softness, not yet, but it was no longer suspicion. Come, he said. There is an old smuggler's route above the chapel. Emma did not move. Vincenzo exhaled. Will you come with me? The question cost him. Emma picked up the core. Yes. _ The cliff passage led to an abandoned lemon terrace above the sea. Dawn remained hours away. The Amalfi Coast appeared in flashes of lightning, white villages against black cliffs, church towers, flooded roads, and waves breaking against stone. A small chapel stood among wind-bent olive trees. Inside waited Salvatore Rizzi, Vincenzo's oldest surviving lieutenant. He had a cut across his forehead and one arm in a sling. 2 loyal men guarded the door. When Vincenzo entered, Salvatore's relief disappeared at the sight of Emma carrying the core. Bellomo has taken the flagship, he said. Lucas opened the internal dock and brought in 12 men. 3 vessels changed allegiance. The others are holding position around Punta Lupo. My crew? Emma asked. Alive. Bellomo broadcast images 10 minutes ago. A monitor showed the Sea Finch's captain and 4 crew members kneeling inside a yacht hangar. Lucas stood behind them. Emma studied his face. There was no regret in it. Only calculation. Bellomo appeared on the screen. He was in his late 50s, silver-haired, and dressed in a white dinner jacket, as if the storm were an event arranged for his entertainment. Emma Brooks, he said, your mother made a sentimental error by trusting blood over intelligence. Bring the Pelagos core to Punta Lupo before sunrise. Vincenzo may accompany you if he wishes to watch his fleet change owners. The screen went dark. Vincenzo looked at Salvatore. How many men remain loyal? On land, 12. On the fleet, uncertain. And Bellomo? At least 40. Emma opened the coastal map. Punta Lupo was a crescent-shaped fortress built into a sea cliff. The harbor entrance was narrow, protected by radar and heavy gates. The fleet formed a ring around it. There is an underwater maintenance channel here, she said. Salvatore looked at her. It was sealed years ago. On official plans, she enlarged the old survey lines. The fortress draws seawater through a cooling system. The channel must still exist, or their generators would overheat. Vincenzo studied the map. You want to enter beneath the harbor. I want to reach my crew without announcing myself. You nearly died in the cave. My line caught. I know why. You are not diving alone. I did not invite you. I am coming. Emma looked at him. His voice had returned to command. He saw it. The muscle in his jaw moved. I am asking to come. Why? Because Bellomo is my war. My crew is my responsibility. And you have become mine. The words landed with dangerous weight. Emma's expression hardened. I am not a ship on your registry. No. Then do not describe me as property. Vincenzo stepped closer. His voice dropped. That is not what I meant. Then what did you mean? His eyes held hers. When your oxygen stopped, I discovered there is a difference between needing someone alive and being unable to imagine surviving her death. The chapel seemed to go silent. Emma could feel Salvatore deliberately looking away. Vincenzo continued. I do not know what name to give that difference. Try fear. I do not fear Bellomo. I was not talking about Bellomo. His gaze lowered briefly to her mouth. Then he looked away. Prepare the dive gear, he ordered Salvatore. Emma almost argued. Then she saw Vincenzo's hands. They were shaking again, only slightly, only because he remembered the empty regulator between them. They entered the water below Punta Lupo at 4:10 a.m. Emma wore a closed-circuit rebreather to avoid releasing bubbles. The Pelagos core was strapped against her chest, inside a pressure casing. Vincenzo moved beside her. The maintenance channel opened beneath a rusted grate 50 feet below the surface. Emma cut through the corroded hinges. They entered a concrete tunnel filled with fast-moving seawater. The current pulled toward the fortress. Emma followed it. At the far end, they surfaced inside a turbine chamber. The noise covered their arrival. Vincenzo climbed out first, then offered his hand. Emma could have refused. She took it. They moved through the service levels, while Salvatore's men created a diversion near the outer harbor. Emma found the yacht hangar through ventilation maps posted near the generators. Her crew was locked behind a reinforced glass wall. Lucas stood outside the chamber. He turned as Emma entered. For 1 second, something like relief appeared on his face. Then he saw Vincenzo. You brought him. You shot at me. I fired beside you. The bullet hit my flare housing. I needed Altieri to pull you out before the divers reached you. Emma stared at him. You expect gratitude? I expected you to understand that Bellomo would kill everyone if I refused. That is the same excuse every coward uses after choosing the dangerous man over the people who trusted him. Lucas's face hardened. I kept you alive for 6 years. You kept me close until I became useful. Vincenzo moved beside her. Lucas glanced at him. There it is. The monster becomes honorable because he wants her. Vincenzo's expression remained cold. No, I remain exactly what I am. He stepped forward. The difference is that she knows. Lucas reached toward an alarm switch. Emma threw a metal diving clip. It struck his hand away from the panel. Vincenzo crossed the distance and drove Lucas against the wall. He could have killed him. Emma saw it in his face. Do not, she said. Vincenzo looked at her. Lucas laughed through his fear. She gives an order, and the king obeys. Vincenzo released him. No, he said. She gives me a reason to choose. Salvatore's men entered through the service corridor and restrained Lucas. Emma opened the crew chamber. Her captain, Elena Ward, embraced her hard enough to make the Pelagos case press between them. You came back, Elena said. Of course. Vincenzo watched Emma greet each crew member. Something unreadable moved across his face. He had spent his life around men who measured loyalty through obedience. Emma's loyalty moved in the opposite direction. She returned because people were in danger, even when they had no power over her at all. The fortress alarms activated. Bellomo's voice filled the hangar. Vincenzo, you have always mistaken rescue for victory. Steel doors sealed every exit. Gas began entering through the upper vents. Emma looked at the Pelagos case. A message appeared across its surface. Fleet network detected. Dominion or Mercy authorization available. Bellomo appeared behind the observation glass above them. He held a remote control. Open the core, he ordered. Vincenzo looked at Emma. She looked at the trapped crew. Bellomo continued. If you refuse, the hangar floods from below. Your friends drown first. Altieri watches. Vincenzo stepped toward the central console. I will open it. Emma caught his arm. No, he needs both of us. He needs my print, and my command signature. Bellomo smiled behind the glass. That is why you are both still alive. The hangar floor opened. Seawater began pouring through the lower vents. Emma's crew climbed onto maintenance platforms. Vincenzo placed his hand on the Pelagos scanner. Emma placed hers beside it. The core opened. 2 commands appeared. Dominion Mercy. Bellomo's voice sharpened. Select Dominion. Emma looked at Vincenzo. This is the moment. He knew what she meant. The fleet represented more than ships. It was his authority, his money, his security, his access to ports, and the fear that kept rival families from attacking everything he controlled. Without it, he would remain dangerous. He would no longer be untouchable. Vincenzo looked toward the harbor display. 43 connected vessels appeared across the Mediterranean network. Cargo ships, yachts, patrol vessels, offshore platforms. Bellomo's organization had infiltrated half of them. Selecting Dominion would place all of it under one command. Vincenzo could take the empire. Claire Brooks had died trying to dismantle. Bellomo laughed softly. You spent 18 years waiting for this. Vincenzo's hand moved toward Dominion. Emma's chest tightened. Perhaps Claire had been wrong to trust him. Perhaps the cave, the shared air, and the fear in his hands had only been moments inside a man still built for power. Vincenzo stopped. He looked at Emma. What happens to the crews if we select Mercy? She studied the protocol. Emergency alarms activate first. Watertight crew compartments release. Lifeboats deploy automatically. Then the ships open their lower valves and erase the network. How long? 12 minutes. Enough to evacuate? On every vessel following safety standards. And the ones Bellomo modified? Emma looked toward the Seafinch crew. Uncertain. Vincenzo turned to Salvatore. Broadcast evacuation on every frequency. Altieri authorization. No exceptions. Bellomo struck the glass. You will not destroy your own bloodline for a diver. Vincenzo looked up at him. My bloodline built ships. His hand covered Emma's on the scanner. She taught me they are not worth the people trapped inside them. He selected Mercy. The Corps asked for final confirmation. This action cannot be reversed. Emma looked at him. Once we do this, there is no fleet. Vincenzo's expression did not change. There is also no cage. Together, they confirmed. Every alarm in Punta Lupo activated. Outside the fortress, the dark yachts lit from bow to stern. Lifeboat panels opened. Navigation systems shut down. Across the harbor, crews ran onto decks as automated evacuation orders sounded in multiple languages. Bellomo's face transformed. He pressed the flood control. Water surged into the hangar faster. Get them out! Emma shouted. Salvatore led the crew toward the upper maintenance ladder. The observation glass opened. Bellomo's men entered from the command level. Vincenzo moved between them and Emma. The fight exploded across the platform. Emma secured the Pelagos core to her harness and climbed toward the emergency bridge. Her crew followed. Water reached their waists. Lucas broke free from one of Salvatore's men and rushed toward the control console. He attempted to cancel Mercy. The system rejected him. Vincenzo saw him. Lucas grabbed Emma from behind. His arm locked across her throat. Reverse it. I cannot. You destroyed everything. No, Emma said. We destroyed what you sold people for. Lucas dragged her toward the rising water. Vincenzo stopped fighting. Every line of his body became still. Release her. Lucas pressed a blade near Emma's side. Order your men back. Vincenzo lowered his hands. Bellomo watched from the stairs. For a second, the older man smiled. He believed he had found the limit of Vincenzo's transformation. Emma looked at Vincenzo. His eyes were not on the blade. They were on her face. She shifted her weight and drove her heel into Lucas's knee. He lost balance. Vincenzo crossed the platform before Lucas could recover. He struck the knife away and pulled Emma behind him. Lucas fell into the rising water. Salvatore caught him before the current carried him beneath the machinery and dragged him toward the ladder. Emma looked at Vincenzo. You saved him. No, your man did. Because you would have asked. The floor shook. Outside, the first yacht began sinking. Its stern dropped beneath the harbor while lifeboats scattered across the stormy water. Then a second vessel tilted. A third. The entire Altieri fleet was going down. Bellomo ran toward the upper exit. Vincenzo started after him. Emma caught his hand. He wants you to choose revenge. He murdered Claire. He corrupted my father's fleet. And he is running toward a harbor full of sinking ships. Vincenzo looked at the man disappearing up the stairs. Then at Emma. 18 years of revenge stood in one direction. She stood in the other. The fortress groaned. He turned away from Bellomo. Move. They climbed. Underscore. The upper harbor had become a storm of steel, fire, and black water. Yachts listed against their anchors. Cargo vessels settled lower in the sea as evacuation lights flashed along their hulls. Lifeboats crossed between them, carrying crews toward the fortress docks. The Marea Nera remained near the harbor entrance. Its bow was already sinking. Bellomo ran across the command bridge toward a helicopter pad. The storm made flight impossible, but desperation had convinced him otherwise. Emma's crew reached a rescue tender. Vincenzo lifted Elena aboard, then Salvatore. Emma remained on the dock. The Pelagos Corps displayed one warning: flagship crew evacuation incomplete. 3 people are still on the Marea Nera, she said. Vincenzo looked toward his sinking ship. The bridge sealed during the sabotage. They will drown. The vessel is unstable. Emma pulled on her dive mask. Vincenzo caught her wrist. No. She looked at him. His fear returned instantly. Do not ask me to watch you go under that hull. Then come with me. That is not a reasonable answer. It is the only one I have. Behind them, the Marea Nera's lights failed one deck at a time. Vincenzo closed his eyes for 1 second. When he opened them, control had become decision. 2 minutes, he said. Then we surface whether we find them or not. 3. 2.5. Emma almost smiled. They entered the water. The flagship's submerged corridor had collapsed near the bridge. Emma led Vincenzo through a broken service window. Inside, furniture floated against the ceiling. They found 2 crewmen in an air pocket near the navigation room and guided them toward the opening. The third was an elderly communications officer trapped behind a warped door. Vincenzo forced the metal apart with both hands. The ship shifted. A heavy cabinet broke loose and struck Emma's tank. Her regulator remained intact, but the pressure gauge dropped. Vincenzo saw it. Panic flashed across his face again. Emma held up 2 fingers. 2 minutes. She helped the officer through the door. They reached the outer corridor. The ship rolled. The exit disappeared beneath falling debris. Emma's tank alarm sounded. Vincenzo removed his regulator. She shook her head. He tried to give it to her. Emma pushed it back and pointed upward. A maintenance hatch stood above them. Together, they forced it open. They surfaced inside the flagship's glass observation lounge as the sea reached the windows. The trapped crewmen climbed toward the exterior deck. Emma gasped for air. Vincenzo ripped off his mask. You said 2.5 minutes. It was closer to 3. You think that helps? You followed me. I am beginning to understand that loving you may be a prolonged medical emergency. The word hung between them. Loving. Vincenzo went still. Emma stared at him. You said it. Yes. Was that intentional? No. The observation windows cracked. He stepped closer. Do you require a better moment? I require honesty. His hand rose toward her face. Water swirled around their knees. The first time I carried you from this sea, you were 14 and unconscious. For 18 years, I remembered your scar because it proved someone survived what I could not stop. His fingers touched her cheek. This time, you looked at me and chose to come back. For the crew. I know. You were not the only reason. His eyes darkened. The window behind them shattered. Water exploded into the lounge. Vincenzo pulled Emma against him and drove them toward the outer deck. They jumped as the Marea Nera rolled beneath the waves. The rescue tender reached them seconds later. Salvatore dragged Emma aboard. Vincenzo climbed after her. Behind them, the flagship disappeared into black water. Around it, the rest of the fleet sank across the harbor. Bellomo's helicopter never left the pad. Authorities later found him alive on the fortress roof, trapped by the collapsed access bridge, and surrounded by the evidence Claire's Corps had transmitted before the network erased itself. The man who believed he could own every route had nowhere left to go. The rescue tender carried Emma, Vincenzo, her crew, and the surviving Altieri sailors toward Amalfi. Behind them, pieces of the fleet remained visible above the water: tilted masts, emergency lights, floating lifeboats, and black hulls settling beneath a pale horizon. Vincenzo sat beside Emma near the stern. He had a small cut above one eyebrow and salt dried across his dark shirt. Without the flagship around him, without armed men lining the walls, he looked no less dangerous. only less protected from being seen. Emma held the Pelagos core. The crystal inside had gone dark. "Is it dead?" he asked. "The command network is erased. And the evidence? Uploaded to 6 maritime authorities before the scuttling sequence completed. You planned that. My mother planned it. You completed it." Emma looked at him. "You lost everything." "No. You lost 43 vessels. I still have ports, warehouses, legal companies, and enemies with excellent timing." "That is not what I meant." Vincenzo watched the shoreline approaching. "I lost the part of my power Bellomo could inherit, and the part you could use to control everyone else." "Yes. Do you regret it?" His gaze returned to her. "Ask me when you are not sitting beside me." Her throat tightened. Vincenzo lifted his hand. He stopped before touching her. The hesitation was new. Emma closed the distance herself and placed his palm against her cheek. His breathing changed. "This is not forgiveness," she said. "I know. You kept me on your ship against my will. Yes, you withheld the truth about my mother. Yes, you still try to turn fear into orders. Yes, and you are going to stop." His thumb moved once across her skin. "I will try. That is not enough. I will fail, recognize it, and correct it before you throw me overboard." "Better." The coastline brightened ahead of them. Vincenzo looked at her as if he had spent his life believing survival was the highest form of devotion, and had only now discovered something more difficult. "Emma." "Yes? I do not know how to ask for what I want without making it sound like a demand. Start badly." His mouth almost curved. "Stay until we reach shore. We are 20 minutes away." "I know. And after?" His eyes held hers. "Decide after." Emma leaned toward him. Their first kiss was slow, salt-warm, and careful. Vincenzo did not pull her closer until her hand closed around the front of his shirt. Then restraint gave way to something deeper. Hunger controlled by the knowledge that she could stop him, leave him, or choose him. When they separated, the sun had reached the water. He rested his forehead against hers. No fleet surrounded them, no locked doors, only the rescue tender moving toward land. The Pelagos evidence dismantled Cesare Bellomo's empire within 3 months. Authorities identified hidden holding compartments on 6 abandoned vessels, recovered records of missing witnesses, and arrested officials across Italy, Greece, Malta, and southern France. Lucas Hale accepted a plea agreement in exchange for testimony. Emma did not attend the sentencing. She had spent enough time watching men explain the choices they made when power frightened them. The wreck of the Asteria was declared a protected crime site and memorial. Emma returned to diving. Not because the sea had given back what it took, but because she finally understood that searching had never been the same as refusing to grieve. Vincenzo survived the collapse of his maritime power. Several rival families challenged him after the fleet sank. None succeeded. He retained his legal shipyards and port companies, but placed them under external compliance oversight as part of an agreement with investigators. Emma suspected the decision had required more courage than destroying the yachts. Sinking steel took one command. Surrendering control took time. 6 months later, Emma stood on the deck of a small marine research vessel off Amalfi. The ship was neither black nor armored. Its white hull carried one name in blue letters: Claire. The vessel belonged to a non-profit maritime rescue and wreck identification program, led by Emma and Elena Ward. Its first mission was to place a memorial marker near the Asteria and begin mapping the surrounding seabed for unrecovered evidence. Emma adjusted her dive harness. A car arrived at the harbor. Vincenzo stepped onto the dock wearing a dark suit without a tie. One security officer remained near the road. Emma looked at the man. Vincenzo said something quietly. The guard returned to the car and drove away. He boarded the Claire alone. "You dismissed him," Emma said. "You said one guard was still a guard. I said 6 guards were not subtle. I interpreted the broader principle. He carried an ordinary dive bag." Emma looked at it. "What is that?" "Equipment." "You own dive equipment?" "I purchased it." "That is not the same as knowing how to use it." "I have been training." "With whom?" "A retired naval instructor in Naples." "You have been secretly taking diving lessons?" I was told surprises were romantic. Not when they involve decompression risk. Vincenzo accepted the criticism. Emma folded her arms. Why are you here? He looked toward the open sea. To go back. The answer reached her immediately. The Asteria. The place where he had carried her out and left her mother behind. You do not owe me that, she said. No. Then why? Because I spent 18 years believing the only useful direction was away from that wreck. He met her eyes. You taught me that returning can be a choice rather than a punishment. Emma studied him. He had not bought the research vessel. He had not assigned men to the expedition. He had not arrived with a command. He had brought his own equipment and asked to board. She handed him a tank. Your air is your responsibility. I remember. You follow my line. Yes. You do not cut my hose. His face tightened. I will never recover from that mistake. Good. They entered the water together. The Mediterranean was calm. Sunlight traveled through the blue in long silver columns. Far below, the Asteria rested against the limestone shelf. Emma led Vincenzo through the open water. He stayed beside her without touching the line. At the wreck, they placed a bronze marker near the engineering room entrance. Claire Brooks, marine engineer. Mother. Witness she chose people over power. Emma rested one gloved hand against the plaque. Vincenzo hovered behind her. He did not interrupt. He did not attempt to share grief that belonged first to her. After a moment, Emma turned and extended her hand. Vincenzo looked at it through his mask. Then he took it. Together, they rose. At the surface, Emma removed her regulator and looked toward the Amalfi cliffs, glowing beneath the afternoon sun. Vincenzo surfaced beside her. The Claire waited nearby. You followed the line, Emma said. I am capable of improvement. You look terrified most of the way. I was underwater with the woman whose oxygen line once stopped in front of me. Fear is not an excuse to control someone. No. What is it? He considered. Information. Emma smiled. Vincenzo reached toward her face, then stopped, as he always did now. She moved closer. Permission granted. He kissed her in the calm sea above the wreck that had once connected them through guilt, silence, and loss. This time, neither of them was being carried unconscious toward someone else's idea of safety. They chose the direction together. Behind them lay the sunken fleet, the dead network, and the empire Vincenzo had destroyed, rather than let it decide Emma's fate. Ahead waited a small white rescue ship with no armor, no hidden cells, and no command system powerful enough to own the person at its wheel. Emma climbed aboard first. Vincenzo followed when she offered her hand. The Mafia boss had once believed love meant sinking everything that threatened the woman he could not lose. Emma taught him something harder. Love was not only the courage to destroy the fleet, it was the discipline to surface beside her, enter her life without taking the helm, and trust her when she chose the course.